I mean, when you see the frame, this is what an edge rusher is supposed to look like, right? I remember talking to people when he was drafted. It's like he was built in a lab to play this position.
Let's bring on Zach Berman. Follow our guy, Z Berm. Covers the Eagles so well for our friends over at PHOI. My guy Espo getting me some caffeine. Zach, I had to abstain from caffeine for since February 10th because I was doing my part as far as holding the Cardinals accountable, making a big signing. They make the splash. I'm back, just dosing myself with caffeine. But let me ask you this, Zach. How does Josh Sweat impact the game in your opinion?
Oh, he's a true three down edge rusher, bro. I mean, he's someone who he can play the run, he can play the pass, he can beat you with speed, he can beat you with power. I mean, when you see the frame, this is what an edge rusher is supposed to look like, right? I remember talking to people when he was drafted. It's like he was built in a lab to play this position, and that you see that now. He hasn't been a prolific like sack producer. He's been productive. He had one his best year came under Gannon, 11 sacks. If you look at it last year, the best, his highest total was in his career was the Super Bowl. He has 2.5 sacks against the Chiefs, matches a Super Bowl high. But I think what you're getting is a high level defensive end, edge, outside linebacker, high level edge rusher who can impact the game against the run, who can impact the game against the pass. I remember talking to Gannon about him 2 years ago, and I kept waiting for Gannon to talk about his pass rush. But Gannon talked about like the physicality, which is interesting because it's not something you're necessarily first thinking about Josh Sweat. He was like this athletic marvel coming out of Florida State, but the physicality is absolutely there.
The physicality, I mean, when you talk about all the tools you want from especially a JG Nick Rawlis pass rusher, it seems that Josh Sweat kind of checks all those boxes. He's kind of a jack of all trades, but is he a master of anything? Like in your opinion, what is his biggest, I guess, strength outside of just his true three down ability?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the athleticism coming around the edge, and the athleticism and the length coming around the edge. That's what always jumped out to me. I mean, even when he first got here, he was unrefined and he was kind of laid off the ball. But man, when he would time it up, you just don't see guys like that. And I remember when he was in the combine, 6'5", 240 something, 4'5", 40. Just he killed the combine, and he was a 3-year guy at Florida State, so he was so young. And this is the thing, it's not like me sitting there at training camp evaluating him. I remember talking to Chris Long, who was on the Eagles then. I remember talking to Lane Johnson about it, and all these guys were like, "Watch out for Sweat, watch out for Sweat," because based on like sheer talent, there aren't many guys in the league like that, and that's always the big thing for me there.
Again, and we went back and forth with him a couple weeks ago in Indy about his where he says that sacks is not a winning stack. He'd rather kind of create the pressure
Yeah.
that would create turnovers, right? He wants the ball. But as far as the sacks, do you see any upside left for Josh Sweat? As you mentioned, the career high under Gannon, 11 sacks in 2022 on their way to the Super Bowl. They fell short against the Chiefs. And then this year, the 10, including the playoffs. Do you see any upside, or is it just like we should just expect you can register this guy in anywhere from
Yeah.
like 7 to 11 sacks?
Well, I mean, first off, I always disagreed with Jonathan when he said that. I think sacks is I look at sacks like they're game changing plays, right? They're negative plays. You can have a pressure and the quarterback still throws it. When there's a sack, the quarterback's on the ground, right? It's a loss on the play. So I always disagree with that. I understand what Jonathan's saying, and to Jonathan's point, in the Super Bowl, Zach Bond's interception that doesn't show up as a Josh Sweat stat. Josh Sweat caused that interception with his pass rush. Like you go back and you watch the film, that was Josh Sweat's pass rush, that was Josh Sweat's hit, and Josh Sweat was the one who forced the Aaron pass. But to the original question, I mean, look, it's possible for Josh Sweat to be, a 12, 15 sack guy because he does get consistent pressure. But I think that the real big thing is making sure that he doesn't fade down the stretch. And there was a period of time from like from the middle of the 22 season to the middle of the 23 season. I think there were only two pass rushers in the league who had more sacks than Josh Sweat, right? But there's been 2 years in a row now where there's been this. He's kind of been stagnant late in the season, and he hasn't had the sacks late in the season. He's someone who I think that he gets a bad reputation for durability because he had this freakish injury in high school. He's been durable throughout his career. I mean, he's played at least 16 games 5 of the last 6 years. The one year he didn't, he played 14 games. But what I will say is he has worn down, at least production wise, down the stretch. And I think it's important to know how to manage him. And I think that's where the background with Gannon will be particularly helpful. I might be less optimistic about how Sweat would do if he went to a locker room or a coaching staff that doesn't have any exposure to him. But I think the fact that Gannon has worked with him will work in Arizona's favor.
Yeah, I mean, you look at just kind of his snap percentage. He played 63% this previous season, 71%. That's up from where Gannon was
Yeah,
playing, where he had that career
yeah,
high sack total. He's playing about 56%. So he'll probably fall into that. Cardinals, they love to lean into that rotation that they have there. There was reports of the knee, but as you mentioned, the durability. This is a guy that didn't miss games. He didn't miss practices. What type of player are they
yeah.
getting as far as just teammate? What's he going to add to the culture? It seems like he's just going to fit right in, just like Kazir White did.
Yeah, so the first part there, you're absolutely like the knee thing bothers him when that comes up, and I think it's ridiculous that that keeps coming up because it's these things that some like people in football are anchored to, but there's been no evidence. If you watch him, there's been no evidence that this knee injury he had in high school is keeping him from playing on Sundays. So it's been over a decade now, and yeah, it bothers him. You'll see when that keeps coming up, there's no evidence of that. As far as personality, he's really bright. I'll start there. He's a really smart guy. I mean, I did a story on him, 2 years ago. He builds computers with his bare hands, like from scratch. He orders the parts. He builds computers. I mean, he's texting me photos of these computers that he's built. It's like, um, I mean, it's brilliant. Like what he's a really bright guy, but he's also, I don't want to say he's like a different kind of guy. I don't think you're signing Josh Sweat to be like the leader of the locker room per se. I don't want to say he's quiet, but he's just kind of he's kind of his own person. He's his own spirit, if you will. Um, but he shows up. He plays hard. I think he cares. But he's definitely not like your rah rah guy. I mean,
Yeah.
if you're expecting him to be, if you're paying $18 million a year for him to be like the defensive leader, I wouldn't say that. If you're paying $18 million a year for him to be the guy who's getting to the quarterback and is affecting the game in so many ways, that's probably better for you.
Yeah. Post Super Bowl, we've seen the Eagles extend Saquon Barkley. They get Zach Bond. They keep him in there as well. What kind of made the Eagles not want to prioritize bringing back Sweat? Was it just that he's going to be able to command a huge market for himself? I mean, 76.4 million with 41 million guaranteed. Are you surprised by that number?
I'm not surprised by that number, and credit to Josh Sweat because anyone in the league could have had him last year. The Eagles were trying to trade him last year. It was like him or Hassan Reddick, and I don't think they were planning to extend either one of them, or at least at the number that the player wanted. Josh Sweat didn't really have much of a trade market last year, coming off of that 23 season, and so the Eagles brought down his number, and it was kind of he was poised to hit free agency, and he was honest. This was a big deal for him. He had never been on the open market. He signed a contract extension in like I think 4 or 5 weeks into year four for him. So he had never been a free agent. Changed his agent right before the Super Bowl, which I think shows you he was ready for this point. Yeah, I think the Eagles were ready to move on there. You can't pay everybody, and the Eagles are paying a lot of guys. They made a bad bet last year on Bryce Huff. They gave Bryce
Mm-hmm.
Huff $17.5 million. If it was up to them, they'd probably want that one back. But they knew there were going to be guys leaving this team. I mean, Milton Williams gets what 25 million a year, thereabouts. Josh Sweat gets this contract. I think the Eagles were ready for this to happen more than anything else. So I would put it more in the camp of they can't pay everyone, and I don't think they were going to give. Josh Sweat, a 3-4 million dollar, oh, I'm sorry, 3-4 year deal when they spent a first round pick on Nolan Smith 2 years ago. They spent $17.5 million on Bryce Huff. They like Jalen Hunt. My guess
Yeah.
is one of their first two picks this year is going to be an edge rusher. It's just kind of the way they're building their roster right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I see it. Yeah, you brought up Milton Williams, and it's kind of part of our conversation because the Cardinals reportedly were in there until the bitter end. And then you've got, New England coming in over the top, given a guy who played under 50% of the snaps, albeit a impactful under 50% of the snaps, especially when you watch how he performed in the Super Bowl. But he gets $104 million and $26 million per season. I mean, you knew he was going to cash in, but that much? Did you expect that from Milton Williams?
Yeah, I mean, I thought he was going to be the highest paid non-quarterback in free agency,
Okay.
and so now 26 was a big number. I thought it was going to be over 20. I thought it was going to be somewhere between like 21 and 23. 26 is big, but when there's multiple teams in there and it's a weak class of free agents, I get it. The appeal of Milton Williams is the player that he can be as opposed to the player he has been, right? Defensive. He's a scheme versatile player who played. He's never played more than 50% of the snaps with the Eagles, and you're thinking, all right, if he takes on a bigger role, he can be a much bigger player. Well, Josh Sweat, you're paying more for the player that he's been. You're paying more for the known commodity rather than kind of the upside. So I think that's the big difference with the two.
Jalen Carter, his representation, he's going to be eligible after next season. I'm sure he's
Yeah.
loving seeing that number, no doubt about it.
Yeah, I think he's probably loving seeing Miles Garrett's number more than Milton Williams' number, right? I mean, I think they'll probably be going for like the 30s as opposed to the 20s.
Unbelievable insight from our guy, Zach Berman. Of course, make sure you follow him on Twitter at ZBerm and reading his work, PHLY. Even did some cross training over at PHNX, GoPHNX.com. You talked about Josh Sweat, Milton Williams during the combine. We really
Yeah.
appreciate that. Go check that out. Get some more insight from Zach that you've already gotten here today. All right, enjoy the rest of the tampering, Peter, Zach, and we'll see you down the line, my man.
Yeah, anytime I can write for GoPHNX.com, I would love to do it, and I wish I can get out there. One of my I don't want to say regrets, but it's typical that the owners meeting alternates between Florida and Arizona. I look forward to getting to Scottsdale every year, or I'm
Yeah.
sorry, every other year. It's not in Scottsdale this year, so I need the NFL to send me to Scottsdale at some point.
Yeah, we need it to happen. Look, Florida, it's not that tough of an assignment down there in,
Yeah,
was it Palm
yeah,
Beach? So, yeah, you'll make
Palm
do, I'm
Beach, yeah,
sure.
yeah.
You'll
There you
make
go,
do.
there you go.
So,
Seriously.
thanks, Zach, dude. We'll talk to you soon.